Hey, Rube.
Hey, Dave.
Who's your favorite Eagle who wasn't really an Eagle of all time?
My favorite Eagle who wasn't really, I'll probably go Marquise Goodwin,
Okay.
just because he was an
Track
Olympic
guy.
got to go with the track guy, the Olympic long jumper. Ended up playing again. He just didn't want to. He just didn't want to go through the COVID year playing football, and he opted out. A little bit of a surprise, but these things happen.
I think he was just worried about having to eventually talk track with you, and he was like, I'm out.
That could have been it, certainly.
Well, we have another guy to add to the list. This is the Eagle Eye podcast presented by Nissan. He's Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. DeVante Parker retires, so we will break down what that means for the team moving forward without him at receiver. OTAs have started. The Eagles had their first session on Monday, so we'll talk a little bit about what OTAs are for and what we expect to see from the Eagles during this spring. And then later in the podcast, you did a fun story looking at how the Eagles have moved on from some franchise greats in their past. And obviously that's a big task this year. So we'll break down a little bit of that later. But let's start with DeVante Parker, kind of out of nowhere. Adam Schefter on Monday evening has already talked to DeVante Parker, who has decided to walk away from football. Happens during the spring, so he doesn't even make it to training camp.
Yeah, and we talked to DeVante in March after he signed here. And first of all, it was a one-year deal with no bonus money, so there's no cap implications. You don't have to worry about dead money or anything. He's just off the books. So that part of it is not a big deal. He didn't seem super enthusiastic when we talked to him. Now, that might have just been his personality. I wonder if he had some doubts even back then. That was 2 months ago. But he said you were there, and he could just be a really quiet guy, but he didn't seem real into being.
That's the first and only time I've ever talked to him. So
yeah, and the last time, most likely.
You don't know that. He could come back and hang out.
I guess he could. Jason Kelsey hangs out at the NovaCare after he retired. So
somehow I think it might not be the same.
Might not be quite the same. But yeah, it was a surprise nonetheless, and it's a position where they don't really have a ton of depth. I mean, they have bodies, but they don't have. I mean, we kind of figured he'd have the first crack at that third wide receiver spot. So it's really wide open now. Had a disappointing career overall as a first half of the first round pick in 2015. The Nelly draft. Had a really good year in 2019 with 12 or 1,200 yards. But other than that, he's been a middling player, but certainly somebody the Eagles hoped would add a little veteran experience and some playmaking to that wide receiver room. So I'm not going to say it's a huge loss. We don't know. He wasn't even a lot to make the team. But just on paper, he was probably the leading candidate for that number 3 spot.
Yeah, I think there were a wide range of outcomes for DeVante Parker. Like, I think it's possible he wasn't even going to be on the 53-man roster, but I think it was also possible that he ended up being third among the receivers in targets this year.
Sure.
Yeah. So, and it kind of just, without him there, it just sheds some light on that position, and it's not very deep right now. Last year they had Quez Watkins, Olamide Zaccheaus, and eventually Julio Jones, all kind of rotating, and we expected one of them to take control of that job, and none of them ever did. So after that, we thought, okay, this is a spot where they probably should try to improve, and they didn't really do that.
No, they didn't. And they drafted a couple guys that are prospects and intriguing, but it's kind of a leap to think that one of those guys, 5th or 6th round pick, 7th round pick, could come in and be a factor, at least, right off the bat. It's hard to imagine. Paris Campbell's here. He's another guy that's had a really disappointing career, 2nd round pick, I think in that J-Jaw draft in 2019. So I don't know. He's another guy who I don't think I even had him on my 53. I guess I would now just by default. I think they're going to have to go out and find somebody. I'm not exactly who that could be at this point. Most people have jobs out there now, but it's something that's been an issue for a couple of years now. Quez had that really good year in 2021, for a third receiver, had a really good year, 647 yards.
Well, he was really the 2 by the end of that year.
He was. Yeah, he was. But yeah, I think they're going to have to go out and find somebody, because I'm not sure that guy is on the roster right now, but I'm not sure what's out there either.
Yeah, well, that's the tricky part about this. I think Paris Campbell, like, this is good news for him. I think his path to being the third guy got a lot easier, and I think they'll probably want to give him that opportunity now because he does have some experience. I mean, they talk about his 160 catch year, like that shows he can play in this league, and I'm not so sure. It's 1 year out of his career where he's been like an okay player. I do find it a little curious that they didn't really make a push to improve the spot, but I guess it makes a little bit of sense because if you have AJ Brown and DeVonta Smith, the bulk of the targets to the receivers are going there. Now, the thing I worry about, and we'll knock on wood here, is if there's an injury there. I thought at least DeVante Parker would be a good backup outside receiver if one of those guys was to miss time. Not that he would have been a great player, but like I feel like he would have been the prime, like the best outside backup on the roster. Whereas like Paris Campbell to me kind of projects a little bit more, like he can give you some speed out of the slot, which I think they want. But in terms of just a pure backup, I thought Parker probably offered more there.
Yeah, and I don't even know who the number one kind of outside next guy would be. Travis Fulgham is available, I think. They're going to have to get somebody. And, do
you think they will? I don't know. I mean, you start off with the top 2, and then you have Paris Campbell, which I think they want to take a look at him. They drafted 2, like you said, Aniyah Smith in the 5th round, Johnny Wilson in the 6th. I think Aniyah Smith of those 2 will probably push for playing time earlier. You have Britton Covey, which like I don't know if he can play receiver, but I'd imagine they'll give him a little bit more opportunities to do that and really take a look at him.
He's also a slot at best.
Sure, but you need someone to play there.
Yeah, but I'm just going back to your point about who's the next outside guy.
Yeah, well, they have a stable of like 6'3" futures guys.
And Joseph Nagata is a guy who did some good things in camp last summer, and he was around all year. I don't think he played. I don't think he got on the field, but an undrafted guy. He's got some good size. I thought he caught the ball well and looked pretty fast. He's the kind of guy you take a look at. But those other guys they have, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and very similar like body type. Ngata, Austin Watkins, Shaq Davis, Jacob Harris, like big body, like X-type receivers. Maybe one of them will surprise us in camp. I think they're all kind of dart throws, but you never know.
Yeah, I think the odds of one of those guys taking ownership of that spot aren't great. I mean, there's a reason they weren't drafted. I don't think any of those guys were drafted, I believe. A couple of them have been in camps elsewhere, but yeah, those are long shot guys.
Now, you mentioned like who might be out there. There are some players, and the one guy who I've been thinking about for a while, and he would kind of be a slot only, obviously, is Hunter Renfrow. I don't know what it would cost. He's still available, had a pretty awful year last year, basically lost his job with the Raiders, had a really good year 2 years ago. Slot only, really good route runner. I'd be curious to see him. I don't know how you feel about Michael Thomas. He's certainly long in the tooth now, and his best days are behind him. He's available. After that, I mean, it's not a good group. It's pretty thin right now, which makes me think that like maybe they'll see what they have in these guys at OTAs and then at training camp before they go make a move. I mean, Julio Jones is out there if you want to bring him back.
Yeah, look, Julio's a good dude, and it was fun having him around, but I just can't imagine that's a direction that they want to go at this point. He did catch a few touchdowns. I didn't think he had a whole lot left, but maybe. It's not even the same offense, so, you don't even have that benefit of at least he knows the offense. Although I guess there'll be some overlap.
Yeah. Knows the quarterback.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe Howie might have to make a trade. I don't think I wouldn't want to go into this season with what they have unless one of these guys, one of these kind of bottom of the roster guys really makes a big jump and has a really impressive camp and you feel comfortable with him on the 53. Barring that, I think Howie might have to give something up to get something.
Do you think could it be a player for player maybe? Like they have
a lot of cornerbacks.
That's what I'm thinking. Like maybe a Josh Jobe or a Eli Ricks or one of those guys who has shown some promise, who like you're looking at this roster going, he's probably not going to make this team, or he's going to be so buried on the depth chart, maybe a player for player at some point.
Yeah, I think that's, if a team realizes it doesn't have the corners it thought it had, doesn't have the depth, or they have injuries, there might be some value. And I think we both had Eli Ricks on our 53.
Mm-hmm.
I think he has a chance to be an NFL player. So, yeah, that's a possibility. Sure.
Who do you think of the cornerback group, and we're off on a tangent now, would offer the most value? Like, and we'll take Keely Ringo out of the mix. I don't think they would trade him.
Right. I would agree with that.
Do you think it would be Eli Ricks?
Probably out of the tradable guys.
Yeah.
And there's Bradbury too. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, the contract, that's a tricky one, obviously. Yeah. I could see a team like selling themselves on Bradbury being a stopgap.
Yeah.
Isaiah Rodgers, I think there's some intrigue if he comes back and like looks okay in preseason.
He'd have to really, he'd have to really show he can. I mean, he's been off for a year. He'd have to really show he's still got it. But he's still a young guy, and he's been a productive player. He's played in the league, so I guess that's possible. You could add him to that Mark Brunell, Frank Gore, Miles Jack list.
You know what's so sick about me is the first name I thought of was Jatavis Brown.
That was kind of weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, the first name I thought of was Mark Brunell. So,
what's the Mark Brunell story?
Oh, it was reported the Eagles had acquired him. They made a trade, and then I guess he decided he didn't want to come here after the trade had been announced, and it never happened. Like, we went to bed thinking he was an Eagle.
Oh, wow.
And we woke up learning that he was not an Eagle.
He was a lefty, Mark Brunell.
He was. Yeah, he still is.
You don't know that.
Do you think he's changed throwing hands?
Yeah.
You're so contrary. No, I'm not.
It was fun going through those names, though. Those are fun names. The Frank Gore one to me is my favorite. But I was thinking of like just the retirement guys, like Miles Jack last year, and then he unretired.
Yeah.
I went to Pittsburgh. Jatavis Brown obviously retired. Hey.
Yeah, those are the ones I could think of. There was a guy, and I know you're gonna kill me for this, but there was a guy the Eagles drafted in the early 90s called Terry Strauff. He was a Division III football player from Wisconsin Lacrosse or Wisconsin Whitewater, one of those Wisconsin Division III schools. I think it was Wisconsin Lacrosse. And the day before training camp, he decided he wasn't going to play football. He was going to try to make the U.S. Olympic team in the shot put. And he had been a 2-time NCAA Division III shot put national champion and discus as well. So he went to the Olympic trials and he didn't make it. And by then the Eagles had released him, and he ended up playing, I think, for the Packers very briefly later. But he was like one day away from training camp. Just decided he never showed up. I'm gonna try to make it in track.
You think DeVante Parker looked at the spring schedule and went, mandatory minicamp? I'm not doing that.
My theory is that he kind of knew a while ago, and I don't know this, but just his demeanor in his press conference. And I know that's a leap, but he was really not into being here. That's how he came across, at least.
Yeah, I think that's unfair to.
Oh, that was my impression. It was just that this is not a guy who's real enthused about being here.
Could have been he wasn't real enthused about talking to us. That
could have been a part of it. He saw me and you in the front row, and
I get that.
Tim McManus, and he was like, "What am I doing here?" But it is and I wonder if who knows? He said he told Schefter he wanted to spend time with his kids. I think he's got 4 kids. Maybe he shows up in the league again. We'll
Maybe.
see.
Yeah, get some time at home with 4 kids, and you might want to. Training camp doesn't sound that bad anymore, huh?
Yeah, you never know. But I'd rather he does this now than starts playing when his heart's not into it. I mean, it's the right thing to do.
Sure, and would it have been nice to know before the draft? Maybe, but I also don't think that would have altered what they did anyway.
I don't think so.
Make the team.
A 31-year-old guy with no guaranteed money on a 1-year contract isn't going to change your draft plans.
Yeah, exactly. And training camp is kind of even though it's easier these days, it's still a big commitment. And if you're not really into it, yeah, you probably shouldn't go.
We don't know how it might not be as easy anymore. The Vic Fangio effect. Right?
Yeah, that's true. I think it will be, but there's limits to how tough it can be.
There's CBA limits. I'm really curious to see, to sit down and compare last year's schedule with this year's schedule once we get it.
The schedule, but then also the actual practices.
Right.
Are there more intense practices? Do they last a little bit longer? Are there more green days where they're really getting after it?
Yeah, I wish they were playing Green Day instead of the music they do play. But then maybe they'll do goal line or short yardage, full pad stuff. Maybe they'll do some live stuff. Yeah,
maybe. They don't really go live at all.
Right.
Tackle to the ground. That's live. Right. Let's talk about OTAs a little bit because we hinted at the schedule. They began OTAs on Monday. It was their first day in the building. We will be there on Wednesday. We're recording this Tuesday morning. We'll be there Wednesday afternoon to watch practice and then to talk to a few players after. I like OTAs. I think it's fun to just see some football, and it's not real football, but the semblance of football. You see some 7-on-7s. You see some competitive periods. They're not in pads. They're in shorts, but you can still tell some things.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you can kind of see some of the young guys, their personalities, how loud they are, how communicative they are. Just how they move. It's there was an open day of rookie practice. How long you weren't in there the whole time though, right?
Yeah, you can't really get much from that.
Yeah, and there's no veterans there. So this will be the first time the team as currently constructed is together. And I'm looking forward to seeing it. I don't think they'll be out there super long, but looking forward to what we do get. Yeah. Yeah,
we'll have to see a little bit. And it's our first chance to see the depth chart a little bit.
True.
They won't show us everything, but someone's got to be out there at cornerback. Someone's got to be the slot receiver. They have to do a little bit to show you something. So that's fun. And then, I don't think you can tell a ton from the linemen in non-padded practices when they're not really hitting each other, but the speed guys, the corners, the receivers, tight ends a little bit, quarterbacks, you can tell some things about these guys.
Oh yeah, no question. And I remember, I'm sure I told this story, but I remember seeing Jalen, his rookie, his first year in 2020 in a mini camp, make a throw. And I probably wrote about it. I probably talked about it for an hour. He made an incredible throw rolling out to his right across his body for a touchdown, going toward Patterson Avenue on that side of the field. And I was like, this guy's really good. I just remember that clicking that day. I still remember that throw. But it's our first chance to see the team, and it's always a lot of fun. And then we'll talk to some of the guys too. So that's always interesting too, how they holding up, how they doing learning everything, how they're handling the big transition in their life.
Yeah. I miss the days of open locker room at OTAs. We don't talk about this a ton, but getting a chance to be in the locker room and talk to these guys was a lot different. And OTAs are always a fun time to work on feature stories and get a little deeper, because once training camp starts, you're kind of in the thick of it and everything has to be geared toward the season. Whereas I always found OTAs fun because you get to kind of know the people a little bit more.
Yeah, and there's some great stories that we won't have a chance to share just because I don't want to. It's not a sob story. I mean, this is just the way our job is now. We don't have access to all the players, and we have access to whoever the Eagles tell us we have access to. So it's a limited number of people. But yeah, I mean, there's some incredible stories. Some of the undrafted guys that we won't be able to tell maybe ever. I'm still waiting to write that Johnny King story, but the guys we do talk to, it'll definitely be a positive hearing their stories.
Who do you want to see on the field? Who are you going to kind of have your eye on?
Well, I think Jalix is one guy. I just want to see how he moves, just what he looks like. He's such an intriguing guy. He's obviously a long-term prospect, but he's a guy I want to see what he looks like playing football, and this will be our first chance to do that.
Yeah, that's Jalix Hunt, the third-round edge rusher. This is kind of the easy answer. I want to see Saquon. We've seen the athletic feats from afar. I think he's a guy who can pop right away, and we'll kind of see the athleticism, I think. So I'm looking forward to that. How about Isaiah Rodgers?
Yeah.
Hasn't played football in a year.
Yeah. I sure hope we get a chance to talk to him. He's got quite a story. And, I mean, I think he sent out some social media stuff. He might have had one. I think he did one
interview with ESPN.
Yeah, it's for like a TV show on betting and sports. But he hasn't really talked about, coming here and all that and what the last year's been like. So hopefully we had a chance to talk to him. I might even beg for him.
I think Anais Smith now, given the wide receiver situation, and I hope he can practice because he was not practicing at rookie camp. He had that stress fracture. So hoping he can be on the field because I really want to watch him. And I think of the two rookies, of the two draft picks, he's the guy who can really push for some playing time this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it hasn't been that long since rookie camp. So, I mean, stress fracture could take a little while. It's not a super serious thing. It's not going to affect him long term, but might be a reach to be back on the field now. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. He's one guy I'm looking forward to seeing. CJ Gardner-Johnson back on the field in Philly. Like he's gonna be turned up a little bit. He's gonna be having fun, and that'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, and the linebackers. I mean, Nakobe. We assume Nakobe will be fully cleared. I don't know that. He said very soon. I guess a month ago. I want to see Devin White. I want to see the whole linebacker group. With some new blood in there and what that looks like.
Will Greer, really excited to see the fourth string quarterback.
How's he spinning it? Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think we'll start to see a little bit of the offense and defense. Now, the big test will certainly come in training camp when they're in full team drills and it's like a little more real at that point. But I don't know. I think we'll start to see some things come together on offense and defense.
Oh, there's no question. And like they're not going to tell us stuff, but they can't line up in ways that they don't want to line up in just to fool us. So we'll get some sense of what they're thinking in some areas, not in all of them. But I think it'll be a good day as far as learning what they're thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, just some structural things offensively and defensively. We'll start to get some hints, hopefully.
Yeah, might be more than hints, but yeah, it'll tell us how they view certain players, and maybe Will Greer's taking reps with the ones, maybe Bradbury's a backup. I mean, we'll learn a lot. I don't think he'll start out that way, but you never know.
Yeah, that's true. And we get to watch all of practice. So that's like we will get to see quite a bit. And we're there once a week. So basically the Eagles have the 10 is the maximum amount of days for OTAs. The Eagles only have 6. So we're talking about them practicing more this spring, and they will, but still just 6 OTAs. They're all voluntary. And then they added the mandatory minicamp.
Voluntary.
They're voluntary.
Yeah.
There's always a chance someone's not there. I expect them to have really strong attendance.
Who's going to take attendance?
I will. Yeah. But I expect most of the players to be there.
It's one of the highlights for me is Dave taking attendance at minicamp.
You got to know who's there.
He's a very serious-minded guy when it comes to attendance.
Yeah, you got to take attendance.
Don't talk to Dave while he's taking attendance.
Unless you're helping.
Even then, I wouldn't say anything to you.
Okay. Sometimes I'll team up with someone and I'll do offense or defense and they'll do the other one. That's helpful.
Is that ethical?
It's got to be someone I trust, though.
I'm not sure that's ethical. You're working with a competition. But I'll accept it. Okay. That's all I have on OTAs. You got anything else there? No, can't wait.
All right, let's take a break and we'll have more on the other side.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table. All right, we're back, Rube. You did a fun story, and we had talked about this for a while, but you finally put pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, and came up with a look at the Eagles' history of replacing all-time great players, which is something they're obviously going to do this year with Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox retiring.
Yeah, and there's only been in history of the NFL only 7 teams, I think it's 6 teams actually, that had to replace 2 6-time Pro Bowlers the same year. So 2 6-time Pro Bowlers with that team either retired or basically retired. So this is not a common thing, but I look back and my hunch was that the Eagles have failed. And look, it's hard to replace legends. And I started looking through the history and I'll just give a few examples. When Reggie White, when free agency started, he signed with the Packers after the 92 season. The Eagles thought they'd replaced him with a guy named Tim Harris, who had 17 and a half sacks the year before. It was kind of like a Robert Quinn type situation. He only played 4 games as an Eagle. He got hurt. They cut him, and he went back to the Niners, but he was never any good again. But that's really been the kind of luck they've had replacing these guys. When Doc signed with the Broncos, they replaced him with Macho Harris. He lasted 6 games. And then they signed Sean Jones, a veteran who had bounced around. And it really was years before they were able to replace a lot of these guys. I go back to Donovan and Kevin Cobb. I mean, that lasted a half. He got hurt in the second quarter of his first start on opening day in 2010, and just never recovered. I mean, so there were some good ones. I mean, there were some guys that worked out. There's not many of them. Did you know? And this is crazy. I looked up the guy that they replaced Steve Van Buren with was a dude named John Husvar. He was an undrafted rookie from Hershey, Pennsylvania. He ran for 300 yards and it was his only year here. And the Eagles had a different lead running back every year for the first 6 years after Van Buren retired. And from 1949 till Wilbur Montgomery in 1978, they did not have a 1,000-yard rusher. So Steve Van Buren was their last 1,000-yard rusher until Wilbur 30 years later. So it took them 30 years to replace Steve Van Buren. But there were some good ones, when Chuck Bednarik retired, they traded for a guy named Dave Lloyd from the Rams, and he was a starter for 9 years, made a Pro Bowl. He's a really good player. So they have had some success with it. Fred Barnett replaced Mike Quick when he retired, and Fred had 2,000-yard seasons and made a Pro Bowl. So there have been some good ones, but and then you have like an Andre Dillard with Jason Peters. He never even had the chance. He got hurt soon after his, that I guess it was the 2020 season training camp started, and he never played, and that led to they brought JP back, and he had replaced. Well, we know the whole story, but eventually Jordan Mailata took over. So indirectly led to Jordan Mailata, but most of these just have not worked out. And I think they're in good hands with Cam Jurgens. I think he'll be fine. I think the two young interior linemen have a lot to prove, but they got some talent there. But we'll see. It's not easy. I think it's not easy mentally. You need the right mentality to be able to replace a guy like that. And everyone's looking at you like, how are they going to do replacing this guy? And it's a lot to ask.
Yeah, I think there's probably more pressure from that standpoint on Cam Jurgens, just because it's a 1-for-1.
Right.
It's like pretty easy to see that. He's the center, right? It's like, whereas defensive tackle, you're rotating. It's part of a group, whereas Cam is not on his own. He's part of an offensive line, and those guys can help him, but it's a 1-for-1 swap. And you're not just replacing a great player, you're replacing a really smart player. You're replacing a
really popular player. Yeah.
A beloved player. And I did want to mention John Clark caught up with Jason Kelce at the Mike Quick golf outing yesterday. Really interesting interview. It was on the Takeoff podcast. So go check that out. Kelce talking about retirement a little bit, why he's been at the NovaCare complex so much despite no longer playing football.
Yeah, anytime Jason Kelce speaks, it's worth listening because it's always interesting.
I agree. You know what really stood out on that list to me, and it's something I've thought about before, but it hammered it home for me, is the Brian Dawkins exit. I think the way things went with Brian Dawkins has informed so much of the decision-making of the front office ever since then in a lot of different ways, right? Like it obviously started with letting him out the door, which they have not let happen with Kelce or Fletcher Cox or Brandon Graham or Lane Johnson. Like, I think it's changed their viewpoint on that, but also like trying to replace him with 5th round Macho Harris was a bad idea. Right. And I think that's another distinction with your list is like, sometimes it doesn't work out and that's just the nature of football, but at least you want to have a plan and you want to have like, at least you want to have some resources devoted to that plan. So I don't know necessarily how these guys are going to fare after Kelce and Cox, but they've at least given themselves a chance because they put significant resources into the position.
I think that's a great point. And that wasn't the case in almost all of these. In a couple it wasn't. It just didn't work out. But, like Dillard, I mean, they had a succession plan there for JP. But, even
Cobb, right? Like, I think it didn't work, obviously, but they had a plan.
Yeah. Second round quarterbacks, not a great track record. But, yeah, they had a plan. I think, Howie was here in 2008. He wasn't the GM yet. But I think he certainly learned from that. And look, they knew Doc was leaving. I mean, they knew there was a really good chance he wasn't going to be here after 2008. And they didn't do anything to plan for it. So this time they do. I mean, the succession plan with Kelce goes back a couple years. Really, they both do for both of them. They were ready for it. They were prepared for it. Doesn't mean it's going to work out, but you can't fault them for having a plan.
Yeah, and that's where like sometimes it doesn't work, but
I think it'll be a good column for you to write.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
maybe. I think that it just goes a long way, and I think they've shown enough forward thinking. Like, think about Jason Peters, right? Like, they drafted Lane Johnson to be his replacement in 2013. They just kept figuring out new ways to replace the guy, and he kept playing and playing and playing. But and it's funny because they did not draft Jordan Mailata to replace him, and he ends up being the guy, which is just a weird, fluky part of this. But I think you have to have some sort of plan in place. And I think for them, it's a little easier on the offensive and defensive lines because they want to build through there anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if it's a safety or another position that's, it's not necessarily at the front of their minds, but they're doing it right now at corner, right? Like they're getting ready to replace Slay at some point. They just drafted 2 cornerbacks in the top 40 picks. So like you can see their planning coming together.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that would be great thing to talk to Howie about. How that 08. I know the 08, the Doc thing. I mean, it had a huge impact on everyone in the organization. Lurie felt awful about the way things ended. He's talked about that when Doc came back. I guess they retired his number. Doc talked about how he's never gotten over that, the way it ended here, and Lurie talked about it as well. So. Yeah, learning experience for the whole franchise, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is there another departure that has been more like informative on the way they've operated after?
Since then?
Yeah. Well, even before then, that in your time covering the team. Like, did the Reggie exit change the way they handled things?
Well, what really changed, I mean, that was part of a whole exodus under Brayman, because Brayman didn't want to pay free agents. He didn't believe in free agency. So he let them all go. Eric Allen, Seth, Clyde, Reggie, Wes, Andre. I mean, they all left. Keith Jackson, Keith Byers. There was the whole franchise just exited from 92 to 94. And then Lurie bought the team. So that's how that was the end result of that. Can you imagine a team losing that kind of talent in free agency in a 3-year period? I mean, it's crazy. But
yeah, you thought the 22 team lost some talent going into next year.
Yeah. But I don't think anybody learned anything from that except that they needed a new owner, and they got one.
Yeah. What are your expectations for Cam?
I think he's going to be okay. I think the mental part of it, I don't worry about with him. I mean, he's very grounded. He's very confident.
When you say the mental part of it, do you mean like the pressure or the actual like mental on the field?
No, the first part. Yeah. I don't think either one, but yeah, just the following a Hall of Famer part.
Okay.
I mean, because it's a guy he's friends with. It's a guy. I mean, I think to Cam, that's Kelsey. He's just, he's a great player, but I mean, he's learned so much from him. I mean, Kelsey really almost handpicked Cam. So there's a great relationship there. Kelsey will probably be in the NovaCare more this year than he was last year. I mean, he's always there. So I don't worry. Yeah, I don't worry about that part of it. I think, I don't think it's a lock, but I think he'll be fine. I really do.
Yeah, I think he'll be fine. I don't think he'll be as good as Jason Kelsey was last year. And it's, to me, it comes down to just the experience bank that Kelsey has that Cam isn't going to have. Whereas like Kelsey knew it was going to happen before it happened. And that's just the benefit of playing at a high level for 13 years, that you build that up. Whereas Cam doesn't really have that yet. I think physically, yeah. I mean, he's as close to Jason Kelsey physically as we've seen, right? And I'm curious to see, so much of their offense was built around the idea of you have a weapon at center. At times you have to hide him a little bit because he's undersized, but the benefit of having that is that he can reach certain blocks, that he can get up the field and block. And with Cam, you still have that athleticism. I expect them to still do a lot of the same things they've done with Kelsey, or at least try to do them.
I just think how valuable the last 2 years have been for Cam. He's been around Kelsey in meetings and in the locker room, on the practice field, and on game day, next to him the last year. And just how, I mean, you pick something like I play piano. If I spent every day of my life like with a better piano player than me, better keyboard player, think how much I would learn just from watching him learn, watching him practice, watching him play, watching him study. I mean, that kind of experience is, I don't mean to bring me into it. I hate that, but just trying to come up with an example. I just think those 2 years have been incredibly valuable. I think the one thing is the centers, in a way, you're only as good as the two guards, and we just don't know about right guard. Like, I think Kelsey always had. I mean, he had Brandon Brooks, and I mean, he had Cam. I mean, he had really good. He had Sayamalo. He had really good, solid right guards and left guards, obviously.
Yeah, but there were times where, like, after Brooks, they were kind of rotating the right guard.
Yeah,
But
but
I remember, like, early in Sayamalu's career, he got benched.
he did. But by then, I mean, Kelsey was already established also, and was playing at a really high level. This is Cam's first year as center, and I don't know who the right guard will be next to him. I mean, it could be Tyler Steen. I don't know. I don't think it's a huge thing, but it is. I think it is a thing.
Mm-hmm. How about on the flip side? We talked about Kelsey, but Cox leaving and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. I have more questions about Jordan than I do Jalen. I think, like, with Jalen, we kind of know the situation. Like, he's supremely talented. He's got to do it for a full season, because we saw more in the first half of his rookie season. And I know they're different types of players, but then we've seen from Jordan in the 2 years he's been here.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't worry about. I mean, I'm still not sure Jalen's going to do the things he has to do to be the player he can be. I don't know that about either of them. But I know the potential is there for Jalen Carter to be an all-pro. I mean, I think it's there. He's just got to. I mean, consistency is going to be the one word you hear from him. I mean, the fitness and the want to and the consistency. I don't know about Jordan Davis. I know there's something there. When we've seen him in the first few weeks last year, I thought he was playing at a Pro Bowl level, and then it just wasn't there anymore. And he was, by the end of the year, he was fairly invisible. So I'm a little concerned about him.
I am too. It's year 3. I mean, this is kind of, you got to show it at some point.
Yeah, he was too high a pick to be a question mark going into year 3.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like, I think sometimes, like, people throw around the word bust. Like, he's already proven to me he's not a bust. He can play. He's a player in this league. It's just like, what is his ceiling? Does he have enough upside to make that pick worth it? And it was always a projection with him drafted that high, because you're kind of banking on the fact that he has some upside as a pass rusher, where, like, we haven't really seen it. And even if he's great against the run, it's like, are you using a top half of the first round pick on a run stuffer? Like, ideally, no. And that's not to say it's not a valuable trait and it's not a valuable role to fill, but you need more than that if you're going to be drafted that high.
Yeah, totally true. I've always been fascinated by the use of the word bust. And I think there's specific criteria. I think it's misused.
I agree. I think it's overused.
I think and I think there's kind of like a graduating scale, like depending where you're drafted. Like, if you're a 5th round pick, you can't be a bust.
I agree.
If you're a 1st round pick and you're out of the league within 3 years, you're a bust. And I mean, unless it's injury related or whatever. But I hear, like, I think we had this conversation about Derek Barnett. I don't consider him a bust. It was
he's an NFL player.
Disappointing pick. Wasn't the player we thought he would be, but certainly not a bust. He's going into year 8?
Mm-hmm.
So he's a functional player. So yeah, maybe I'll take a look at 10 busts who weren't bust. Mike Mamula wasn't a bust.
Yeah, you've been defending Mamula for how many years?
Before when he was still a freshman at Boston College,
you saw into the future.
Lackawanna High School.
He appreciates that too, I believe, doesn't he?
He does.
Because I get that. It's for whatever reason he got branded with that label, and I think he could probably admit that he didn't have the career that people expected him to have, but I don't know, he had a career.
31 and a half sacks in 6 years, playing out of position, playing on first down, which he shouldn't have been. Maybe I'll do a column on 10 busts who weren't really busts.
Okay.
Like Nelly. I mean, people, I can't call Nelly a bust.
Weird career, not a bust.
I mean, he was what was he drafted in 15?
Mm-hmm.
He's going to year 10.
Yeah.
He had an incredible fourth quarter of a Super Bowl, 3 straight catches for first downs on the game-winning drive of a Super Bowl. He's got over 5,000 yards. I mean, weird career, yeah. He's never had that one like, DeVante Parker had that 1,200. He's never had that one great season. I don't know if he's ever even had – what's the most he's had? Like he might have had an 800-yard season or two, but he's not a bust. I'm gonna do that. 10 busts who weren't busts. Thank you for the idea. I'll give you a co-byline.
Give me a tagline.
We're way off topic, but yeah, I like that.
Talking just Eagles players, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are more. We'll play with that. That's fun.
We'll come up with. We need 7 more to have a top 10 list.
Do you ever not want to do 10? Like,
I always want to do 10. No, well, with this thing on the following a legend, I think I did 12.
Did that bother you?
It's kind of a little bit.
Yeah, but you didn't number it, right?
I did not number it. It was chronological.
Okay.
I could have kept going. Like, I was like, should I put Ertz in here with Goddard? But like, I mean, Goddard was already playing. He was in his 4th year when Ertz got traded, so it didn't really fit the model. But it's an interesting pattern. Most of them didn't work out. But yeah, I could have done 20. Yeah. Fortunately, there was a long period of time where they didn't have legends. They didn't have good players. So, you didn't have to worry about anyone following a legend because they didn't have any.
I'm really excited to get out the OTAs on Wednesday.
Yeah, and we'll have a pod Thursday, and we'll kind of break it all down. What we see.
Yeah, and then so basically the way it works is we're there one day each week. They have OTAs, but then the mandatory minicamp we're there all 3 days, and we'll have a ton of access there. So like for us and our coverage and the podcast, having the minicamp's a nice little boost this year.
Yeah. I mean, there was years with Nick when he didn't have. I mean, when we never saw anyone, we just were never there until training camp, maybe one day. So this will be nice. Yeah,
and that's early June 4th to June 6th. The Eagles were one of 2 teams last year to not have it. They haven't had one at all in the Nick Sirianni era. We've talked about that a little bit. They were supposed to have one his first season, but then he kind of struck up a deal with the veterans that. No, we'll show up to OTAs if you cancel that mandatory camp. And then after that, like it kind of made sense, like you kind of set the precedent. And then last year was super easy to explain away because they had that deep run. You're coming off the Super Bowl and you had that hangover and all that. But I mean, this year there was no excuse. Like the way the season ended last year, like you need to change things up. Then you have a new offensive coordinator. You have a new defensive coordinator. You have all these new pieces. Like if you don't do a mandatory camp this year, when would you ever do one?
Yeah, and I think that's been kind of a hallmark of this offseason is what can we do differently? Whether it's drafting a cornerback early and then another one, or signing a running back to a relatively big money deal. I mean, there's been a lot of things that are off the Howie plan, like kind of off the model. And maybe after the way last year ended, the last month and a half, you want to change as much as possible. Not just the coordinators, but everything.
Maybe, yeah. Change for the sake of change probably isn't the way to go, but if there's thought behind it, then I'm fine with it. Yeah. All right, we got anything else here?
Nope.
Okay, let's tell the people, as I always
There is actually one other thing.
Of course there is.
I was at Old Sturbridge Village for the first time since I was a kid on Sunday up in Sturbridge, Mass. About its southern tip of, well, it's not a tip, but it's kind of an hour north of Hartford, I guess. Highly recommended. Dave's never been there. If you've been to Old Sturbridge Village, it's a working colonial village. It's a huge, sprawling, 500-acre plot of land, and they basically it's a working colonial village, and they show you how everything was done. I think it's based on. When
you went as a kid, was that even a draw?
Yeah, it was only a couple of years earlier that it. No, but it's if you've been there, if you went there as a kid, or you've been there with your kids, or recently, tell Dave how great it is. And
please don't do that.
It's a really cool thing. Yeah, cards and letters, tweets. threads, Facebook messages.
I did have a real thing before we wrap this up. The Eagles Autism Challenge was this past weekend. They had a huge turnout, over 5,600 participants. They raised over $8.1 million with this event this year, over $30 million since the inaugural one in 2018. So they do incredible work, and it's kind of, it is their biggest charitable endeavor these days. Like they still have other things, but this has become the thing for the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's cool. It's cool to see them throw themselves behind one cause and do as much as they've done for it.
Yeah, and it's such a great cause, and they're doing really like impactful work right in the community, right in the city. A lot of the money goes to research that's being done right in Philly, and yeah, it's amazing. I've done the 5K I think 3 times now. I was out of town. I couldn't do it but I would recommend it to any Eagles fan. I mean, all the players are there, the coaches are there, and I think I told you I ran the 5K, the 1 year part of it, the last mile with the linebacker coach who went to Ken Flagel, which was a blast. Like when are you going to get like that much time to talk to Ken Flagel? But there's a lot of stuff for kids in the stadium. The finish line's at the 50-yard line, which is really cool. You finish on the field, and then you go right to all these activities for kids, autographs, photos of players. It's a really nice event. I couldn't recommend it more. And brainchild of Jeffrey Lurie, and what's the number? Over $30 million over the years
since 2018. Yeah.
Yeah. So good for them. Good for the franchise, and everybody participated.
Yeah. AJ Brown did not get hit this year. That's a good thing, but also my favorite thing. Rob Kessner from NBC 10 caught up with AJ at the event. He was doing the bike race on an electric bike.
Was he really?
Yeah, he said, "Work smarter, not harder."
I'm not sure that's allowed, but I honestly, the players on the bikes kind of worries me a little bit. I'm not sure I would allow that, but
I mean, Matt Collins used to ride his bike to work every day.
He did. Yeah, he almost ran me over once. but yeah, Matt Collins, is he a bust? No, he's been in the league like 6 years. He was a 6th round pick, 5th round pick,
4th round pick.
4th round pick. You're right. Not a bust.
Not a bust. Still playing. He's in Buffalo now.
Is he? Mm-hmm. It's a good place for him.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap this up. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, click that like button, subscribe there as well. We'll be back with you Thursday to break down our first glimpse at OTAs. But that's it for today. For Rube, I'm Dave. This has been Eagle Eye presented by Nissan.